Hi guys, welcome back to Cookie Cat. Today we're going to be reacting to another video with my cat. His name's Leo. I think the comments are disabled on here, so smash like if you want to say hi to Leo and give him a hug. Alright Leo, you can go take a nap now. Right, there you go. Okay, so today we're going to be reacting to My Whole Life Was a Lie for 17 Years. I have no idea what it's about, but let's just watch it. Okay.
Outside a busy restaurant, there was a 17-year-old girl begging for money. She held a child in her arms. She was too skinny, dirty, and tired. No one paid any attention to her. A few minutes later, exhausted, she sat on the curb, holding her baby, listening to the hungry cries of her newborn. She didn't know what to do. A car pulled up beside her. A lady walked out and took her hand. "Stand up, sweetheart." The young girl stood. "Why are you here?" The young girl told the lady her story. Her boyfriend abandoned her when he knew she was pregnant, and she didn't know anyone else in the city. She didn't know where to go or how to get her next meal. The lady listened to the story without interrupting. "My name's Griselda," she said. "I've got a place that you can go to. I've helped many women just like you. Will you come with me?" Desperate, the young girl joined the woman in her car. She took her to a shelter for women in need. The young girl had heard stories about shelters, but this was nothing like the accounts she'd heard. It was neat, friendly, and warm. It was a place where women regained their dignity and cared for their children. It was blissful. Griselda was a rich businesswoman, but the shelter was her passion. She funded it and searched the streets looking for women who needed help. There were many of these women, and they all seemed to grow healthy again under her watch. In Griselda's haven, women healed from their trauma. Seeing this gave Griselda a sense of fulfillment. Most of these women would leave the shelter only to return a few weeks later, newly traumatized. 9 times out of 10, it always came back to the same thing. Men. Men were ruining the lives of these women. Griselda hired lawyers, hounded social workers, and called the police, but it was always the same. Nothing changed. The women continued to return to her, broken and defeated. After years of this, Griselda finally snapped. Every time a man came near her, she would just about spit on him. Within a week, the shelter closed down. Griselda and most of the women disappeared. Some returned to the streets or the homes where they were neglected. Griselda bought acres of farmland in the middle of nowhere, a place so far removed that no one knew about it. She built a giant wall around the perimeter, hidden behind a thick forest of trees. She put female guards up on the only entrance. She cut the internet, satellite, and cellular signals in the area, jamming and confusing these signals so that our community's location didn't even show up on digital maps. "When we keep the men outside, we will have a safe place to grow," she told the women. She invited all the women in the shelter to join her, saying that there was more than enough room for all of them. Griselda promised them work and a new life, free of pain and suffering. All the women had to do was promise they would never speak about men again. There were many women who weren't willing to part ways with men. They were kicked out of the shelter and excluded from Griselda's plans. But there were many women who had come to love Griselda and saw her as a mother. These women agreed to her conditions. These women were welcomed into her community. My mother was one of them. In fact, I was the baby that 17-year-old girl was holding. And my name is Stephanie. I went to school like all the other girls. Everything taught in the community was a modified version of history. All inventions, discoveries, and breakthroughs were made by women. They told us that there wasn't anything outside the community because the rest of the world was destroyed in a very strange version of World War II. Beyond the forest and the wall that separated our community from the outside were all kinds of scary things. Zombies, monsters, etc. These were the scary bedtime stories that all the girls were told. My life in the community was fun and safe. I had lots of friends, and it didn't bother me in the least that they were all girls. The adults gave me tons of freedom and were very open with me. That changed when I was 17. That was when I began to ask too many questions about our history. I loved to explore and push the boundaries. We had grown up hearing stories about the boundary wall not being safe. There were usually patrols that passed through the forest, making sure that none of the girls strayed too far. I waited for them to pass and snuck right up to it. The wall was huge and there was no way I was going to see through it, but I followed the wall for a few days, mapping it out, seeing how far it stretched. That was when I found the guarded entrance. During a changeover of the guards, the entrance was temporarily open. I looked out past the wall and was surprised to see that the world I knew continued. It was nothing like the stories we'd been told, filled with decaying trees and radiated animals. It was alive and beautiful out there. I spent my afternoon sneaking to the entrance and watching from the bushes for any signs of life. About 2 weeks later, a truck arrived at the entrance. I saw the strangest creature climbing out of the truck, like a woman but with short hair and a deep voice. I told my friends what I had seen, but they didn't believe me. The next day, I was called in to see Griselda. She assured me that what I had seen was just a woman who had suffered because of the radiation out in the world beyond the community. But I saw plants out there, I said. Of course, she said. It's only a small patch of loveliness just before it gets really ugly and unsafe. Now I need you to stay away from that wall. It's not
Kinda
safe out there. Maybe
manipulative.
she was right. I agreed to stay away from the wall, but unlike my friends, my curiosity continued to grow. Griselda was definitely hiding something.
Among
About 3
Us.
months later, one of the pregnant ladies that used to babysit me when I was younger went into labor. After 2 days of not seeing or hearing from her, I went to the hospital to see her. She was dazed from all the medication, but when she saw me, she became lucid. "They took my boy," she cried. That was all she was able to say. The nurses burst into the room, ushered me out, and closed the door. That evening, I asked my mother what boy meant.
Why?
She almost dropped the pan that she was washing. Then she smiled at me and asked me where I'd heard that word. I told her. It must be a name that she gave to her daughter. I didn't feel like I was getting the whole truth, but I let it go. A week later, I went to visit my babysitter in the hospital, but she wasn't there anymore.
Jeez.
But Griselda was. She greeted me with a sad look on her
She
face.
doesn't even know what the word
Unfortunately, she
boy
didn't make it
means?
through the trauma of her delivery. I was shocked. I'd seen her after she'd had her baby. It didn't make sense. But I came to see... Griselda didn't let me finish. She has suffered enough. Please leave this now. Go and grieve and stop fighting me on this. I spent the next day wandering the...
I'm hearing weird noises. What? What are you? What? 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 Why are you poking me? What? No, I love you too.
the community alone, clearing my head. Something kept bringing my mind back to that entrance, so I visited my secret spot in the bushes where I could watch. A car drove by and stopped in front of the gate. I couldn't believe my eyes. In the passenger seat was my babysitter. She looked sad, but she was definitely alive. Griselda was driving the car. After signing the paperwork, the gate opened and the car drove out. I was confused, angry, and hurt. Nothing was making sense. I could tell that people were lying to me, but I didn't know why. Even my own mother was holding back on the truth. I decided not to tell her anything. I wanted to do my own research. After conversations with my friends, I discovered that something strange often happened to the pregnant women in the community. About 60% of their children didn't make it. Most of these women either died or were committed to a wing in the hospital for the mentally unstable.
Why are you
So I put in a
poking me?
request to intern as a nurse at the hospital. It took me a few weeks to earn the trust of the head nurse, but eventually I did. She started to relax around me. When I knew I could take the chance, I asked her about the patients in the mentally unstable wing. "You don't want to go in there," she said. "Just a lot of sedated women." I told her that I wanted the hands-on experience. I asked her if I could just work there for a day. "Okay, but just for a day." I visited the wing and found that these women were still alive. While many of them were heavily sedated, there were 2 or 3 that were awake and willing to share their stories with me. "No boys allowed in the community," one lady told me. "What does boy mean?" She laughed at me and told me the strangest story I had ever been told. It went against all the biology lessons I had learned at school.
Oh, come on, not another ad. I always have the worst luck with ads.
So how is it?
Okay, there we
There's
go.
a whole world out there, she said. I remember leaving it when I was about 7 years old. It's not a wasteland. They've been lying to us. Obsessed with finding answers, I snuck up to the fence and waited for an opportunity to sneak out. A delivery vehicle arrived. As they were unloading the truck, I slipped into the back. We drove for about an hour. When the truck stopped, the back was opened. I slipped out undetected. I walked into a tall building, bigger than anything that I'd seen in the community. It was filled with stores of every kind. And more than that, it was a mix of people. Lots of women, but also lots of these other strange creatures. One of these strange-looking women came up to me. "Are you okay? You look lost," he said. He was about the same age as me. I told him it was my first time here. He offered to show me around because his friends had bailed on him and he had some time to kill. He took me from store to store, but I barely heard what he said. I was more fascinated by him. "What kind of girls are you?" I asked him. He laughed. "I hear you. I should probably get my hair cut pretty soon." I had so many more questions for this stranger, but I didn't get a chance to ask anymore. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around. It was Griselda. "Excuse us, young man," she said to the boy. "We need to leave." He smiled and waved at me, and then walked away. I pulled away from Griselda. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said. Griselda shook her head. "You have no idea what you're doing, Stephanie. I'm not the villain here, okay? But if you want answers, I'll give them to you." Griselda took me to a coffee shop and we sat down. Griselda specifically asked for a female waiter.
Tea,
This
coffee,
is a
and
mall,
whiskey.
she said, and those strange creatures that you're seeing are boys. All the stories that we've told you, they've been to protect you and your sisters in the community, but they haven't been the whole truth. What is the truth? I asked. The truth is that boys become men, and men end up hurting women. Griselda told me why she had started the community. We spoke for hours. The more she explained, the more I could understand why she hated men so much. Your own mother was abandoned by a man. Your father. Is that the life that you want to live? One filled with these vile creatures? They can't all be bad, I said. Griselda shook her head. They are. Every last one of them. She looked a bit creepy when she said that, but then she took a deep breath and calmed down. We're going to go back home now, Stephanie. To your family. Your mother, your friends, your community. And when we go back, you won't mention a word of this to anyone. Do you understand? You can't expect me to keep quiet about this, I said. They need to know. Griselda slammed her fist on the table. No one needs to know anything. I've been patient with you, but if you want to infect the minds of my community with what you've seen here today, I'll make you pay for it. She grabbed my wrist and told me that it was time to go. I tried to pull my hands free, but she wouldn't let go. I shouted for her to stop. A male security guard came over to us and asked if everything was okay. Griselda smiled at him and told him that she was my grandmother, and we were just leaving, but I wasn't going anywhere. Help me, I said. She's not my grandmother, and I don't want to go with her. Griselda tried to run then, but the security guard stopped her. We were taken to a room and held there until the police arrived. They questioned me in a separate room to Griselda. I told them my story. They couldn't believe what I was telling them. Griselda didn't say anything until her lawyers arrived. There was an army of them. Ironically, some of them were men. I'm not doing anything illegal, she said to the police. The police said they'd need to investigate. I was kept in a safe house while the police performed their
Neil, why do you keep bothering me? I'm recording a video.
investigation. I watched television for the first time. It blew my mind. I surfed the internet and even signed up for a few social media accounts. I couldn't believe that there was a whole world of information out there, and anyone could access it for free. I also watched the news from all over the world. It was there that I saw regular updates about what was happening with Griselda and the community. It turns out she had broken the law, and she had hurt a lot of women who didn't want to play by her rules. I felt sorry for her, though. I knew that she just wanted to help. Her anger had overcome her. I testified against her in the court case. Griselda's lawyers kept her out of prison, but she had to give up the farmland and the community. The court ordered her to create a rehabilitation program for all the women who lived on her compound. I spent the next year learning about the real world, about real history, real boys, and everything else that actually happened. I have to admit, Griselda was right. The real world was a mess, but it was real, and I prefer it that way. Some of the other girls didn't cope in this new world. They struggled and wanted things to go back to the normal that they remembered. I did my best to remind them about the truth. The world is a harsh place, but running and hiding is not a solution. The best that we can do for ourselves is not wish that things were easier, but rather that we were stronger. Strong enough to take on the challenges that we face. Most of the older women were angry with me. They wanted things to go back to normal. My mother was one of them. She was disappointed in me and barely spoke to me for the first month. Since then, things have become a lot better between us. After my year of rehabilitation, I started college with a few of the other girls from the community. It was great to be in a place where I was free to ask questions and find answers. A place that encouraged me to be curious. It's the reason why I'm studying to become a lawyer. To make sure that the truth has a voice. It's also nice to have boys around on the campus. I haven't had the courage to start dating anyone yet, but one day I will. Although Griselda did the craziest and creepiest thing ever, I've learned something from her. I will never, ever allow anyone to mistreat me.
Huh. That was pretty interesting. So guys, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and be a part of Fat Cat Squad.
Hey, I'm Talon, and this is Ruffus,
Ah.
and I'm going to show you how to
Alright,
start
bye
online
guys.